Good day everyone! Today we're going to discuss the behaviorism learning theory. I know all of you have already a knowledge about it, but if not, this discussion will help you to know and understand the behaviorism learning theory. At the end of this lesson, you will able to recognize important contributors of the behavioral learning theory, define the behaviorism, discuss the behaviorism theory, and identify the application to instructional design. As we go to our discussion, here are simple reminder to everyone. Please ready your pen, notebook, ears, and eyes to successfully understand the lesson. Thank you. Now, let's proceed to our discussion. History of Behaviorism. Behaviorism originally developed by John Watson in 1913. Behaviorism started as a reaction against introspective psychology in the 19th century, which relied heavily on first-person account. Watson and Skinner rejected introspective method as being subjective and unquantifiable. These psychologists wanted to focus on observable, quantifiable events and behaviors. They said that science should take into account only observable indicators. They helped bring psychology into higher relevance by showing that it could be accurately measured and understood. And it was not just based off opinions. 19th century, similar views as psychoanalytic and Gestalt movement in psychology. 20th century, result of cognitive revolution. 21st century, behavior analysis is a thriving field. Behaviorism theories. Ivan Pavlov, founder of classical conditioning, unconditioned stimulus cause unconditioned response. John V. Watson coined the term behaviorism. He studied how a certain stimuli led organism to make a response. He believed psychology was only an objective observation of behavior. Skinner radical behaviorism proposed that all action is determined and not free. Operant response behavior that control the rate of which a specific consequence occur. The first person who discovered behaviorism, the Russian psychologist named Ivan Pavlov. Behaviorism had its earliest start with the work of a Russian psychologist named Ivan Pavlov. Pavlov's research on the digestive system of a dog led to his discovery of the classical conditioning process, which proposed that behaviors could be led via condition association. Watson and Skinner believed that if they were given a group of infants, the way they were raised and the environment put them into would be the ultimate determining factor for how they act, not their parent or their genetics. Pavlov's dogs a popular behaviorism experiment. A group of dogs would hear a bell ring and then they would be given food. After enough time, when the bell would ring, the dogs would salivate, expecting the food before they even saw it. This is exactly what behaviorism argues, that the things we experience and their environment are the drivers of how we act. The stimulus-response sequence is a key element of understanding behaviorism. A stimulus is given, for example, a bell ring, and the response is what happened next. A dog salivates or a pallet of food is given. Behavioral learning theory argues that even complex action can be broken down into stimulus response.
Good day, and so I'm going to discuss the timeline of development. It was first in 1863 where Ivan Sechenow's Reflexes of the Brain was published, introducing the inhibitory responses in the central nervous system. So, Reflexes of the Brain was his famous work, which introduced electrophysiology and neurophysiology into laboratories and teaching medicine. And the next by this was in 90s, wherein Ivan Pavlov studying the salivary responses and other reflexes. So after the 90s, is the 1913, wherein John Watson's psychology as a behaviorist views. It was published outlining the many points of behaviorism. So after 1913 is in 1920, wherein Watson and Silverini conducted the famous Little Albert experiment. Little Albert experiment was a controlled experiment showing empirical evidence on the empirical evidence of classical condition in humans. And this study also provides an example of stimulus generalization. So the next one is in 1943, wherein Clark Hall's Principle of Behavior was published. So he believed that behavior is one of the ways that an organism maintains his balance. And also in this idea, he suggested that all motivation arises as a result of biological needs. So the next one is in 1948, where Skinner published Walden 2, by which he describes utopian society is founded upon behaviorist principles. So the next one is in 1959, wherein Noam Chomsky criticized the Skinner's review of verbal behavior. Chomsky attempts to account for language in behaviorist terms, and he was successful in convincing the scientific community that adult language use cannot be adequately described in terms of sequence of behaviors or responses. And the last but not the least in the timeline of development is in 1971, where Skinner's published his book, The Beyond Freedom and Dignity, in which he argued that free will is an illusion. So that's all. I am Danica Abuan Macanas from BS ED 2D. Thank you.
So, good day everyone. So, I am Jude Catalon. I'm from BZ 2D and now I am the reporter for definitions of behaviorism. So, what is behaviorism? Behaviorism is the equated learning with behaviors that can be observed and measured, because behaviorism is a theory of cognitions that focuses on behavior instead of thoughts, feelings, or motivations. And also, reinforcement is key to successful transfer through behavioristic learning. Strong emphasis on the stimulus, the response, and the relationship between them, because behaviorism is an approach to study behavior based only on what can be directly seen.
Did my co-presenter make everything clear for you in the context of behaviorism? I bet that they made such an excellent discussion. And now, let's move to application of instructional design. Behaviorism deemed applicable to instructional design when you aim to create measurable and observable learning outcomes among students, to use tangible rewards and informative feedback to improve students' learning performance, to guide students in mastering a set of predictable skills or behaviors. You can find countless ways to apply behaviorism theory in the classroom to elicit and maintain desired student behavior. Example of behavior modification techniques include praise, reward system, continual feedback, positive reinforcement, and non-punitive discipline. Moreover, most of the application of instructional design is, first, the student will work for everything that bring them positive feeling. Second is the use of a token system that can reinforce the positive academic performance. Third is the student can utilize the art of repetition so that the information remains concrete during the learning process. Fourth is the use of small progressively sequenced tasks that ensure that students remain focused during the learning process. Since we talk about application of instructional design, I will give some example that will deepen our understanding about instructional design in behaviorism. Example of application is a teacher provides a substantial list of practice problems for students to help them learn algebra. The stimulus is the practice problem. The response is the correct solution to the problem. The learning is the repetition help the students learn algebra. It means the stimulus help the students to do their best to find the correct answer where it was their response. Then because of that, they will repeat and practice to solve the problem. Then they will learn the algebra. Another example is a computer simulation helping prospective airplane pilots to learn to fly, then rewards the user with tokens for each successful simulation that after collecting enough, they can cash in for flying a real plane. The stimulus is the reward or tokens for proper demonstration of knowledge. The response is a feeling of accomplishment, of getting closer to goal of flying. The learning is the repetition causes the pilot to learn to fly, and the tokens reinforce the proper demonstration of the flight. Hope you learned a lot on how behaviorism and instructional design apply.
So the question is, how would you learn with this theory applied to instruction intended for you? So number one is negative reinforcement is for an undesired response is more beneficial. So what are those undesired response? Those are failing grades or failed exams, something like that. And then in order for this undesired response not to achieve by the students, negative reinforcement is given by the teacher, such as they said that if you didn't study hard, you may get a failing grade. And that's how students drives to study hard, because we all know that no one wants a failing grade. So the last one or the second one is example of what not to do can provide better understanding of the desired end goal. So what are those examples? Such as number one, incentives. Teachers should not give incentives to students because students may not beyond or looking for their learning but to that incentives. But however, these incentives cannot deny that it has a big help in driving the students to study hard so that they can gain a lot of knowledge. And because of that, it seems that that things that what should not do can provide better understanding to achieve desired end goal, and it seems like a key for better learning. And the example scenario inside the classroom is that when a teacher was given an instruction to the students that he will going to give a candy to those students who will answer the question. And so in that, we can see that the students will drive to answer a question in order to gain candy. And at the same time, they are learning, and actively participating in the classroom. So that's all my discussion. I am Danica Aban Macanas from BSED2D. Thank you.
Now let's summarize the whole lesson. Let's start with the fact that Judge Watson was an American psychologist that considered as the father of behaviorism. Behaviorism is one of the three primary learning truths. On the other hand, according to Watson, behaviorism was the science of observable behavior, or in short, he believed that all behaviors are learned through interaction with the environment, or through the process called conditioning. His most famous and controversial experiment became known as the Little Albert's experiment. If you still haven't heard about this experiment, to sum things up, the experiment started when Watson and Rayner presented little Albert with a white rat and he showed no fear. Then they showed the rat again with a loud bang that made little Albert cry. The primary goal of this theory, or the behaviorism theory, is to form a relationship between a stimulus and a response. And that was the end of this report. I hope you guys have learned something. Thank you for listening.